welcome to you. Now, you're calling for this new testing regime at airports. How would it work?
Well, it would be a two-stage test. So on arrival, you would be tested to see whether you had COVID. If you are clear of COVID, you would then go into quarantine as you normally would. You'd give all your details for tracking and testing and tracing. And then after either 5 or 8 days, you'd have a second test. If that came up clean, then you'd be allowed out of quarantine early. So that would save 5, 6, 7 days of quarantine, which would be a huge benefit for people who are coming back from Spain last week who suddenly got caught out by this quarantine roulette.
Would you be able to introduce something like this relatively quickly at Heathrow? Would you be geared up for it?
Yes, we could. We've been planning ahead, and we've been working with Swissport Collinson on how this would work for the last 4 weeks. We pushed the button over the weekend on setting up a testing facility in Terminal 2. We can have that up and running within the next 2 weeks. What we need, though, is for the government to work with us on this. We need them to allow people out of quarantine if they have tested clear at both of those testing points. We need them to work with us on making sure we tie into their track and trace system. And I'm sure there'll be some other changes that we need to make to fit in with government policy. But this is an opportunity for government and the driver sector to work together to save the economy, but also prevent a second wave of COVID.
John, wouldn't this involve travellers having to hang around at the airport, though, once they'd arrived? How long would they have to do so?
Well, they'd only be there for the test itself, and then they get the results after they've gone to their place of quarantine. So they don't need to hang around for very long. And bear in mind, this is only for passengers coming in from red countries, and there are very few of those at all at the moment. About a third of our usual markets are considered amber and green, and people are allowed to travel freely to those. But the balance, 70% of all of our markets are considered red. Very few people are flying from those countries. And only those people who want to have the test as an alternative to quarantine and are prepared to pay for the test, and it is £150, so it's not cheap at the moment, but those people would volunteer to go through a test as a way of exiting quarantine quicker.
Now, countries like France and Germany are already doing this at their airports. Is there much evidence of it being successful?
Oh, yes. And in fact, places like France have taken a less conservative approach than we are proposing here in the UK. So they started their trials at the beginning of June with their overseas dependent territories. They initially had a test on departure and on arrival. And then when they found that they were getting consistent results at both ends, they dropped the test on arrival and now just rely on a single test before departure. Now, that sounds like a fantastic solution, but we completely understand that that's not something that the UK government is prepared to do at this stage, because a single test is not good enough to tell whether somebody is contagious. So that's why we're supporting a double test, either at first day and fifth day or first day and eighth day, so that we can make sure that we are not re-importing COVID while allowing people to get out of quarantine quicker.
What would be the consequences to your business, John? I mean, you've outlined some pretty horrendous financial results today of the government not going ahead with something like this. I mean, the industry just can't limp on like this, can it?
No, and for us as a business, we've lost £500 million in the first half of this year. So it's a devastating impact. Fortunately, we are well funded. We're investment grade credit rating. We have enough cash to see us through to the end of 2022. So we're very well placed. But not everyone in the aviation sector is in that position. And we will see more companies going to the wall and more job losses as a result of keeping Britain locked down for the foreseeable future. So we do need to see a path through. The government's already done some good things by introducing this risk-based approach with the green, amber, red approach. What we now need to do is to have a solution for red countries that will get people flying. And where this matters increasingly will be on finding a way for people to be able to travel between the UK and places like Canada and Singapore, the US, India, key trading markets that we need to be exporting to, that we need to get tourists from over the coming year. And unless we have a way of allowing people to travel more freely to those markets, then the UK economy is really going to struggle. We've already seen millions of job losses being announced. I'm doing my best to avoid compulsory job losses at Heathrow, but it's really difficult. But we all want to keep people safe, but also keep people in work.
John, how badly has confidence in the government been shaken by its rather arbitrary imposition of these quarantine rules on travellers from Spain, and in particular the Spanish islands?
Well, I think the government has a really difficult job to do, and only they can make the judgment between keeping people safe and keeping the economy moving and helping people get on their holidays. And it's an impossible decision to make, and we don't have all the information they need. So I can't criticise the government over what they have chosen to do. What I do want to do, though, is make sure this doesn't happen again by having an alternative to blanket quarantine. Passengers will understandably feel that they're playing quarantine roulette when they go on holiday and don't know whether they'll be quarantined when they return or not. We need to have another way of doing this, and we don't know.
But you say, John, you say that the German government has been rather more forensic in how it's imposed quarantine regulations. So if you take Spain, the German government has imposed it on Catalonia, on Aragon, but not on the Spanish islands.
And I think that kind of regional approach does seem to make sense. When you think about the first wave of COVID, entire countries were locked down, and the response from other countries was to close off entire countries. The second wave response is much more targeted. It's individual cities that are being locked down. And that suggests we should have a much more targeted approach to quarantine. So people coming from Barcelona, we'd want to quarantine or test them. But people coming from the Canary Islands, it's hard to see why they would be treated as if they were coming from Barcelona. And when you think about a country the size of the United States, that's an entire continent. Why are we treating New York the way that we might treat Miami or Texas? We need to have a more targeted and more sophisticated way of opening our borders so that we keep people safe, but we allow people to get back to work in as normal a way as possible. We're going to be living with this for a long time. And if our response is to close down our country as a small island trading nation, we will kill our economy and millions of jobs will be lost that could have been saved. And that's why we want to work with the government to get this alternative to quarantine for red countries up and running as fast as possible.
John, if you'd be so kind briefly, please. You mentioned that you're resisting compulsory redundancies. For how much longer can you do this if things continue in this vein?
Well, we're coming to the end of our negotiations with the unions. We've already had a voluntary severance scheme for frontline colleagues, and about 850 frontline colleagues have chosen to leave, and we've looked after them well in doing so. But if we get to the right conclusion with the unions, we can avoid compulsory job losses while getting our costs down. But it's as simple as a trade-off between paying people less than we used to, particularly if they were on legacy terms, way above market rates, paying those people a bit less to get them back onto market terms. And if we don't do that, we're going to have to look at compulsory job losses.